2024 is now over, which means it's a new year, and I believe this is the perfect time to talk about what my favorite album releases were of last year. Before this video starts fully, I'd like to say first that this is a unscripted video, as I kind of wanted to let my opinions flow naturally rather than, writing a script down. And this isn't a video I want it to be super long, so if it is very long, I do apologize. So yeah, let's get into this video. Start with an album that I don't think would naturally be expected, being as this channel mostly has never really talked about rap music. But at number 6, I have We Don't Trust You by Future and Metro Boomin. This album was, on first listen, like a really eye-opening experience. I don't think I'd ever really intentionally listened to a full-length Future record, but this was the first time I'd done so, and I think this was definitely a nice introduction to the one of modern rap's pioneers. So I think this album definitely, on a lyrical standpoint and vocal standpoint and production standpoint, was a very eye-opening record. I did find myself coming back to a lot of the songs throughout the year, since I believe this album came out in April, if I'm not mistaken. I think it did come out in April, but throughout the year, even months after the album's release, I found myself coming back to songs like We Don't Trust You, Young Metro, Ice Attack, Type Shit, Claustrophobic, Like That, Slimed In, Magic Don Juan, and a couple others on the latter end of the track list, but those were my favorite, as they are the ones that I did hard on Apple Music. Now, before I go on to the next album, I do think that if you aren't typically a fan of rap music, I think you should probably check this album out. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it definitely is a album that I think will stick with you, for better or for worse, honestly. But I do really like this album, and I think it's probably one of the best highlights of last year's music releases. Next, I'd like to talk about Short and Sweet by Sabrina Carpenter. Now, this album, when I went into this record, I knew I was gonna love it from even when the singles came out. I knew this was gonna be an album that I absolutely adored because of, again, the singles, and because of Sabrina's previous album, Emails I Can't Send, which was, I think, 2022. Yeah, that album was one I really enjoyed of that year, and I kind of was always anticipating her return. Not return, but I was always anticipating her next album release. And when I heard that she was coming out with a new album last year, it intrigued me, because I wanted to see how the progression from Emails I Can't Send, and then Emails I Can't Send Forward, and then how Short and Sweet would, show all her improvements. And I think this album was a massive improvement in Sabrina's songwriting, in her vocals, in her album's production. And I think where this album really shines is the lyrics. I think when I was listening to this album for the first time, I really was paying attention to the vocals and lyrics, obviously, but after I listened to this album a few times, I kind of read the lyrics on their own, and I noticed that, these were like, I can tell these took a lot of time, because songs like Dumb and Poetic, honestly, just, I don't know, these songs really were a vibe, and I really did enjoy them. And I think I have half of this album track list hearted on my Apple Music, but yeah, this is a release that I think was a highlight of last year, and I think is an album that a lot of people can find takeaways from. Even if this isn't your style of music, I think if you just read the lyrics to some of these songs, I think you can kind of pick up a message that could personally relate to you. Everyone can find something relatable on this album, and I think that's definitely a positive takeaway from this record. I really do love this album, and I really believe that a lot of people should give this album a chance. If you haven't heard it already, it was like one of the biggest albums of last year, and I think it is a marvelous piece of music. And yeah, this is a really good album. At number 4, I have Chromacopia by Tyler, the Creator. This was an album that, honestly, when the year started, I wasn't expecting a Tyler release. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't expecting a Tyler album. I kind of thought we weren't gonna get something after Estate Sale for a while, but when he released the singles, I think Noid was the first single that was released on YouTube. Yeah, it automatically pulled me right back into the world of Tyler, because he is a modern day genius, I would say, when it comes to music. I think his previous albums, like Call Me If You Get Lost, Igor, Flower Boy, even Cherry Bomb, were all masterpieces in my opinion, and I think all of those album releases had major takeaways, especially on Igor. I love that record a lot, and Call Me If You Get Lost, I love those albums. I have a lot of songs that I do cherish from those records. But bringing it back to Chromacopia, this album is a masterpiece. From front to back on this record, there is honestly not a single skip. And even some people I know didn't like Sticky. Even that song I think is pretty good. I think honestly, this is it's not Tyler's best work. Don't get me wrong, it's not his best album at all, but I think this album really does show a lot of improvement, and I think this album definitely shows that he still takes his craft seriously even after all of these years. Songs like Darling Eyes, Saint Chroma, and Hey Jane are really deep and sort of, I guess you could say, personal to Tyler, and I think the more vulnerable the tracks are, the more I think is put into them, and I think that's, I don't know, I think these were highlights of the album in my opinion. And then songs like Take Off Your Mask and Thought I Was Dead, and Sticky as well, are really more energetic, I guess you could say. I guess you could say a little more energetic, and they keep the album flowing nicely. And I think the tracklist order was very smart, because I think the way the songs flow and one another was definitely kept this album fresh, and it kept it from feeling like repetitive or anything like that, because every song was definitely different, and I love when an album is able to do that. So Chromacopia is definitely one of the best albums of last year, and it's definitely a highlight of Tyler's career. At number 3, we have Hit Me Hard and Soft by Billie Eilish. Now, this album came out a little more earlier in the year, and instantly when this album came out, it was a highlight of my year. This album was the long-awaited album from Miss Billie herself, and she did not come to play. Even from the album's announcement, she said she didn't want to drop any singles for this and wanted the whole album to speak for itself. And months later, almost a year later, I can say this album definitely speaks for itself. The music speaks for itself, and Billie on this record is completely unapologetically herself, and I love that on this album. I think the songs on here really flow nicely in one another, and I think the improvement from Billie's writing and Phineas's writing on this record are definitely present and in the room when it comes to this record. I do think that this album, while shorter than her previous releases, this one still packs a punch with all the time that it's had. Even if it's only 10 songs, this album still holds a lot of weight, and I think that's honestly a beautiful thing, because this album is very personal to Billie, and not just personal to her, but personal to a lot of people. Especially, again, like I said previously, if there's takeaways that you can take from an album and find them into your own life, I think that's definitely a beautiful thing. And I think this album definitely has a lot of takeaways, and this album is probably one of my favorites for, just not even of this year, of the last year, but of the decade. I mean, this album was inspirational. It was very good, and I think if any of these albums on this list, you definitely should give this one a spin. At number 2, we have Brat by Charlie XCX. Now, this album was, I guess you could say, album of the summer, but that's an understatement because it's more like album of the year. And I think, although not my number 1 album, my number 2, this album was brilliant. From front to back, again, this album knows exactly what it's doing, knows exactly what it's here for, and completely does a great job at that. This album sets out to be a club banger record, and it's an electronic masterpiece. And I think this album here is Charlie completely perfecting the electronic craft that she worked so hard to build up all these years and years. I think this is the best form of what she's been working towards her entire career, and I think that now that she's finally here, I believe it's only going up from here because this album is stellar. Now, this one definitely isn't for everyone, and I know not everyone's into electronic music, but this album still deserves a spin because it's definitely unique in its own right. And I think even not even just like unique by the sound, I think it's just unique by Charlie's presence herself on the actual record. I think she definitely has her own style and way of doing things that make her stand out from the rest of the crowd. Everyone else is sort of doing, I don't want to say the same exact thing, but everyone else is mostly doing the same sort of generic, pop thing. But I think Charlie really takes a step forward when it comes to her music, and I love that. Her confidence, her stage presence is all like unique, and I think that also elevates and boosts this album's credibility because Charlie puts a lot of work and craftsmanship into her albums, and you can definitely see that, especially on Brat. This album was not only album of the summer, but I personally think it's another one of the defining albums of the decade so far, and only time will tell how much longer this album can stand. But I think this album will stand the test of time because it's so monumental and it moves a lot, and I love that about this record. So definitely give this record a spin. If you have not listened to Brat, it is not too late to check this album out. That's all I'll say. And finally, at number 1, we have Eternal Sunshine by Ariana Grande. This album was the highlight of last year's music releases, not only because Ariana Grande is one of my favorite pop singers or singers in general, but because this album was a long wait. From 2020 when she released her album Positions to 2024 when we got Eternal Sunshine, there hadn't really been too much talk of a new album. While I know a lot of leaks did come out previously before this album released, I never listened to any of them, so the wait just felt longer. But when we finally got the announcement of the album and got the first single, which was Yes And, I knew it was go time because I knew something was cooking up for a while, but I just didn't know when it would be released. But I gotta say that the final output and the final product of this, which is this album, is by far my favorite release of last year. I think the music on here is probably some of the most vulnerable music that we've gotten from Ariana in a while. Not saying it is the most vulnerable, but it is definitely some of the most vulnerable content that we've gotten from Ariana lyrically, that we haven't seen in quite a while. And I think this also kind of does feel like a bit of a return to form almost for her sound, as her last album Positions definitely did feel more R&B inspired. Same with Thank You Next and kind of Sweetener as well. But this album really did feel more poppy than her her previous albums, and nothing's wrong with the R&B sound. I think that's one of her best styles that she delves into. But I think, you know, hearing the pop again wasn't that bad, and I definitely love that we kind of got to see her in that light again after getting a lot of R&B heavy rap almost inspired tracks for quite a while. Now, before I move on to the end of this video, I want to talk about some of my favorite cuts from this album, and because I think there's a lot that can be taken away from the music on this album. First off, Don't Want to Break Up Again is probably my favorite song on this album. I think Ariana's vocals on this song really shine, and I think you can definitely hear the ambition still in the vocals after all these years, even being one of the world's biggest pop stars. I think the drive is still there, definitely, and I think it's definitely noticeable on this track specifically, and as well as, of course, The Boy Is Mine, True Story, Yes And. But my second favorite track that I really love on this album is We Can't Be Friends. This one is like, I want to say pop perfection. Like, this one is just like the sound that I think of when I hear Ariana Grande. Like, now this is probably the first song that comes to mind whenever I hear her name, so this one is probably the brightest song on this album, sound wise, not lyrically, but I'm just saying sound wise, this one is probably one of my favorites on this album. It's definitely my second favorite on this album, and it's probably it is one that I come back to often. Like, a lot of times I come back to these two songs, as well as I Wish I Hated You and Imperfect for You. And I think the production on this album is also very well done. I think the production on this album is immaculate and is some of the most polished music I've heard in a while. So, Eternal Sunshine, please listen to this album. If you haven't listened to this album, check it out. It's very, very good, and it's so good that I think it almost requires multiple listens at the same time, because like, when you finish the album, you kind of have to play it again and really be like, did I just hear what I heard? It's one of those records, and I love that about this album, and I think that this album definitely should be streamed by everyone, and everyone, again, similarly like I said to the Sabrina Carpenter record, this is an album that I think has a lot of takeaways that you can take personally, and that you could probably relate to in your own life, and I think that's definitely present here on this record as well, similar to Short and Sweet by Sabrina Carpenter. Now, I don't want to make this video too long. I think it's already pretty long, but yeah, I think I'll end it here. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and let me know your favorite albums of 2024. What albums did you really like a lot? Which albums stuck with you? What albums did you bring into 2020? Are you bringing into 2025 with you? And also, let me know your least favorite albums of the year, if you have any. If you agree with some of my takes, let me know in the comments down below. I'm sorry for the stuttering. Again, this is not a scripted video, but yeah, next video will be a scripted one, so don't worry about that. But if you enjoyed this video, yeah, be sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.